Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Honest. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis wants to end property taxes. Is the day coming when Floridians no longer have to rent their own house from the government? More important, will it spread to other states? Last week, DeSantis said he'll hold a referendum next year on abolishing property tax for owner-occupied homes in Florida, calling property tax, quote, the most oppressive form of taxation, and comparing it to paying rent to government. The referendum would prohibit cities and counties in Florida collecting the tax. The state already has no property tax. This would save the average Floridian roughly $3,400 per year in property tax. It would raise their home price between $50,000 and $100,000 since taxes reduce property values, and it would protect families from future tax grabs like what Florida cities and counties did during Bidenflation, when house prices soared, property taxes soared, and they put it in their pocket instead of reducing rates. Statewide, that Bidenflation grab was a 35% increase in property taxes. In Tampa, Miami, it was closer to 60%. Of course, cue the howls from those local governments who would lose roughly 1/8 of their tax revenue, and of course, are threatening to cut the most popular programs, so schools, fire, police. In other words, local governments used house prices to jack spending by a third during Bidenflation, but now they have to give half of it back. It's cat food for the kids and no more police for you. DeSantis responded to the threats with a new Florida state DOGE program that's currently auditing Florida's 479 local governments for, quote, bloated spending, including hundreds of millions for tunnels and trains to nowhere, a Miami stadium that's set to gobble $2.5 billion, and, of course, billions for left-wing NGOs who feast on local government since voters don't pay attention to local politics. Now, beyond the tax relief, the abolition would only be owner-occupied housing. Corporations would still be taxed. So it tilts Florida in favor of traditional homeownership at the expense of corporations like BlackRock, who are currently gobbling up over a quarter of homes in the U.S. Now, it's still not a done deal. Referendums in Florida need 60% to pass, and the left will pump out oceans of propaganda about starving kids and underfunded police before they cut a single crony penny. But if it does pass, Florida will be a model for other states trying to reduce their property taxes. So Pennsylvania and Kansas already have proposals to eliminate property tax, while a grassroots campaign in Ohio is pushing for a referendum. Texas and Montana are trying to slash property taxes at the state level by reining in cities. So what's next? While voters fight over national headlines, local governments sit quietly in the dark, siphoning your life savings with hike after hike and handing it to their friends, activists, and NGOs. Bidenflation was the opportunity of a generation for them, and they got greedy. The victims noticed. This will be a nationwide and well-funded fight. Because of that NGO funding, the left will not walk away from billions in free government money without a fight, but the backlash is coming. It's a blue-collar boom with teenage welders making six figures, even as armies of white collars with crippling college debt worry a chatbot will replace them. The micro-economy is here. Recently, Treasury Secretary Bissett announced that wage growth for blue-collar jobs hit a 60-year high. Meanwhile, a new study from the Federal Reserve says the unemployment rate for construction service majors is 0.7%, while the unemployment rate for computer science grads is 6.1%. For computer engineering, it's 7.5%. So those are 2008-style unemployment rates, perhaps because construction workers are being deported, but H-1B sweatshops are not. Now, what's driving it is a perfect storm of four things: mass deportation, freeing up jobs for blue collars at twice the wage, billions in federal grant cuts that were a universal basic income for sociology majors, a coming construction boom driven by tariffs and Trump negotiating trillion-dollar foreign investment deals, and finally, the slow realization that AI will be hitting white collars, since it turns out you cannot replace a welder with a chatbot. Last week, the San Francisco Gate profiled a group of Bay Area teenagers skipping college to learn welding and waltzing into jobs that pay $80 to $90 an hour. That's over $100,000 a year for teenagers. The stunned Gate asks if college degrees are obsolete. Indeed, a recent study by Microsoft predicted the jobs least at risk from AI are overwhelmingly blue-collar, so plasters, roofers, pile drivers. A study by OpenAI, ChatGPT, claims the only jobs that are 100% safe from AI are blue-collar jobs. The Kids Are Listening, a May survey found over a quarter of blue-collar Gen Z specifically cite AI as a reason to choose blue-collar work. Another survey of 1,000 Gen Z found 43% have changed their career plans into work they think will not get automated by AI. The San Francisco Gate quotes one refrigeration instructor saying, quote, when ChatGPT really started taking off, they were like, this is here sooner than I thought. I better pick a good career path. The losers, of course, are the millions of Americans who sold themselves into debt slavery for a soon-to-be worthless sheepskin. One survey by Resume Builder found 37% of blue-collar workers actually do have a college degree that apparently is worthless. The Gate profiles a young woman who got her degree in earth sciences, found the only companies hiring were management consulting, which is a 60-hour week sleeping under your desk and flying to Cleveland. At her mechanic father's urging, she switched to welding. So as next, Trump's timing on tariffs and deportations is perfect for the coming AI revolution. Not just because we'll need the jobs, but because AI itself erodes a major advantage of India or Mexico, cheap labor, while deportations ensure America's blue-collar boom benefits Americans, not Guatemalans. As for what's next in his tariff wars, Trump squeezed trade partners for $4 trillion in business investment, which will be hitting over the next 18 months as factories get built and then get operated. So we could actually see an acceleration from white-collar to blue-collar, and if AI continues improving, it could turn into a flood. In the cult classic Office Space, the movie ends with freed cubicle slave Peter leaning on his shovel at a construction site, satisfyingly dirt-smudged, enjoying the sunlight and fresh air. If trends continue, this is the future of the American economy. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold, paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. Now back to our show. Canada is on the edge of recession as exports crash, while their new globalist prime minister looks for new fights to pick with Donald Trump so it crashes harder. The numbers come from Stats Canada, who reports the economy contracted by an annualized 1.6% last quarter, driven by an annualized 27% drop in exports. Business investment fell an annualized 10.1%. Last one out, turn off the lights. The one growth area was government spending, which soared 5% while the economy shrank, bureaucrats recession-proof since 1867. The news sent the Canadian dollar, the loonie, tumbling to just 72 cents. In 2012, the Canadian dollar was worth more than the U.S. dollar. It's already carnage up north after a decade of Justin Trudeau and Canada's new World Economic Forum approved Prime Minister Mark Carney. Carnage, they call him. In short, wages are West Virginia while housing costs are Los Angeles. According to the OECD, disposable income in Canada, what's left after taxes, is just 57% what it is in the U.S. In 2010, Canada was richer than the U.S. This is partly falling wages. Canada has 4 times the level of migration of the U.S., and partly because Canadian taxes are nearly twice the level in the U.S. Meanwhile, according to Royal Bank of Canada, housing costs, mortgage, property tax, utilities, eats up more than half of disposable income in Canada. The U.S., it's closer to a third. Incidentally, according to RBC, in Toronto, it costs 77% of disposable income for the median household on housing costs. In Vancouver, it's 98.6%, not a joke. Unsurprisingly, 70% of Canadians now say owning a house is, quote, impossible. Unemployment in Canada is almost 7%, In the U.S., it's 4.2. Canadian youth employment is 14.6%, which is Great Depression levels. Last month alone, Canada lost 41,000 jobs. That's almost 400,000 in U.S. terms. And even when they can get a job, Canadian wages are flat since 2016, while growth has fallen off a cliff, with Canada turning in the lowest growth out of 50 developed countries since COVID, with productivity dropping in 15 of the last 17 quarters. Business insolvencies are at a 15-year high, also the highest since the 2008 crisis. Finally, the last man standing debt. Canada's household debt is the highest in the G7. It's nearly 2.5 times U.S. levels relative to disposable income. Put it all together, according to Stats Canada, 40% of middle-class Canadians are living hand-to-mouth. 25% now live in, quote, material deprivation, including 42% of renters and 45% of single-parent families, of which there are many since Canada's marriage rate has collapsed to just half that of the U.S. Less marriage means less kids. Canada's fertility rate is now 1.1 per woman, so every generation drops in half. That also means for every new Canadian, births minus deaths, there are 28 new migrants. Population replacement, turbo speed. So as next, Canada is a resource superpower, from oil and natural gas to wheat and hydro, with a tiny population. By all rights, it should be Saudi Arabia, where they don't pay any taxes. Unfortunately, the government fails to exploit these for green reasons, and unfortunately there's no relief in sight for the mass migration or the crashing exports. The migrants because they are the replacement voters for the Liberals, and the exports because instead of cutting deals to preserve millions of jobs, Carney is picking fights with Trump from censorship to Gaza, while floating goofy fantasies like replacing American exports with the EU, which would take decades if it happened. It could be a long 4 years in Canada. The number of farms in America is in free fall, while corporate farms and Wall Street hoover up the republic. The numbers come from a new USDA report, which finds we've lost 500,000 farms since 1980. It's about 1 in 5. Corporate consolidation has driven the average farm size to 466 acres. That's about 3 times what it was a century ago. In 1980, 4% of farms were corporations. Now it's 19%, producing nearly 2/3 of America's food. Since 1980 alone, we've lost 89% of dairies and 91% of pig farms, all replaced by corporations. And it will get worse. The University of Illinois found farmers are now losing $81 per acre of soybeans, $118 per acre of corn. Meanwhile, investment groups who use farmland as a tax shelter have bought up 30 million acres, which is the size of Iowa, while total agricultural area has fallen by 300 million acres. That's 9 Iowas. What's driving it is regulations and mandates that give corporate farms a crushing advantage. One study found small farms spend 3 times per unit of output on regulatory compliance, while over 80% of small farmers say regulations are a key reason they are considering exiting the industry. One produce rule, the FSMA, can cost 1/5 of the entire revenue of a small farm, while water permits for a farm ditch can cost $250,000 and take 788 days to obtain, during which you have to truck in water. The EPA itself found environmental regulations are 10 times more likely to penalize small farms who do not have in-house legal departments. One Wyoming farmer faced a $16 million fine for building a pond on his 8-acre farm. It's not just the regulations. Corporate farms plow millions into lobbying and playing the system. They're 3 times more likely to get government-backed credit lines, and they have a 30% lower cost of capital. So small farms cannot compete. What's the solution? Easy. Deregulation. Let small farmers sell what they want to who they want. That means raw milk, heirloom breeds, farm-fresh eggs, raw honey, on-farm slaughter, unpasteurized butter, herbal medicines. Get rid of zoning that bans farm stands and direct-to-consumer sales. Get rid of the USDA inspection cartel that favors large farms. Let small producers set up their own supply chains and co-ops. The second is the financial privileges, and land banking tax shelters allow full expensing for all farmers and either equalize farm loans or get rid of them so corporations don't have that capital advantage. Allow farmers to opt out of state-mandated marketing fees that fund the corporate lobbying. Finally, end the estate tax, the death tax. It doesn't hit corporations because they never die, but contributes to 70% of family farms not being passed on to the next generation. With almost 40% of farmland owned by farmers over 65, the clock is ticking. So as next, Trump's trying his best to boost American farm exports, but unless the regulatory and financing cartel is fixed, those exports will go to corporations while family farms keep disappearing. In a recent video, I mentioned Trump's trying to get rid of hundreds of thousands of regulations using Doge tools. Hopefully, they'll point that at the regulatory straitjacket killing the American farm. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. If Trump takes over the Fed, will inflation get even worse, or is the Fed the heroic defender of hard money it claims? Last week, Donald Trump fired Fed member Lisa Cook for alleged mortgage fraud. The first time in the Fed's 112-year existence, a member has been fired. Cook apparently has zero expertise in monetary policy. Her academic career consists of cooking data to blame racism. Still, she's hired a lawyer and is suing to keep her job, so depending how these Supremes swing, she could stick around. Nonetheless, our mainstream Keynesian oligarchy is in full panic mode at the prospect of the Fed coming under control of the elected president instead of the unelected banker junta. Voters running countries. To hear them tell it, we're going straight to Weimar, wheelbarrows of money and all. Now, to be fair, we are going to Weimar anyway since Congress spends like a crackhead with $1 trillion visa, but the Keynesians claim that it will go faster once voters get a hold of the Fed. Now, this debate's been around for decades, with people like Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul arguing Fed independence is a myth, propaganda for an organization that will always serve the dark alliance of government and banks it was built to serve, while acting as an engineered scapegoat to insulate elected representatives from voters. It's actually worse. I tallied up monetary policy under Democrat and Republican presidents and found Democrats get much lower rates. They get the cheap money boom, while Republicans get recession-inducing rates, in case you wonder about those charts showing the economy does better under Democrats. Nonetheless, Keynesian professors and financial journalists argue voters would make it even worse because they'll demand easy money booms that inevitably cause inflation. So we just had a fantastic natural experiment from Trump's firing of Cook in the form of bond yields, which tell us what markets, not pundits, think will happen to inflation. So Trump floated firing Cook Friday at 10 a.m. on the 22nd, saying, quote, "I'll fire her if she doesn't resign." The comments immediately sent two-year bond yields plunging, meaning markets expect lower short-term rates. This is what you'd expect since Trump's been pretty clear that he wants rate cuts to boost the economy. What was interesting is yields also plunged on both the 10-year and the 30-year, which are key measures of future inflation. As in, markets think inflation will be lower if Trump takes over the Fed. In fact, the 10-year dropped almost 10 basis points in 90 minutes, which is close to what it normally moves in a month. In other words, just taking the data, markets think presidential control of the Fed reduces long-term inflation. So if I had to guess, what's happening here is the Fed already prints as much inflation as it can get away with, what I call the pitchfork standard, as in voter anger at high inflation or low jobs. But greater presidential control reduces the other part of Fed inflation, the trillions quietly flooded out to banks in so-called quantitative easing. So rates don't change, but the automatic bailouts shrink. So what's next? Ideally, Trump can break the Fed and let the economy run itself like Andrew Jackson did when he got rid of the central bank. But the next best thing is break the economic oligarchy and hand control and accountability back to the people. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersaintange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.